Over the Labor Day weekend, a massive labor protest happened in India. And in fact, many are saying that this might be the largest strike in the history of humanity. The scale of it is, it's difficult to comprehend, but we want to talk about why this strike happened and who is taking part. Union officials said about 180 million workers, including state bank employees, school teachers, postal workers, miners, and construction workers, were participating, but the figure could not be independently verified. But we do know that thousands of state-run banks, government offices, and factories were closed on Friday, and public transport disrupted, although the union leaders made clear that essential services in terms of water production and availability and energy and things like that were maintained. Although this is that's like 70% of the workforce of America choosing to strike on one day. They're not looking to make the regular citizens of India suffer, obviously. They're just trying to make their voice heard. And this strike came after Prime Minister Narendra Modi began a push for increased foreign investment and privatization of some state-run industries. Unions fear these policies will undermine both wages and unemployment. And there is some evidence that that would actually be the case, that these workers, many of whom are suffering under conditions that American workers can't even conceive of, it could actually become worse for them if this path was continued down.
Right. I love that this strike is happening, and I know that with most strikes and most protests that are actually effective, they're inconvenient. And I know they're going to be inconvenient for India's population in general, but it's important that this happens, right? And so I feel like this is the natural way labor experiences progress in various countries. That's what happened here in the United States, where we had strikes, where we had protests, where labor unions got together and started fighting for fair working conditions, safe working conditions. Right now, one of the reasons why so many major U.S. companies are outsourcing jobs to countries like India or China is because labor's a lot cheaper there. And part of the reason why labor's a lot cheaper is because people get away with paying, their employees tiny amounts of money in unsafe working conditions. And I just think that this is just the natural process of how things are supposed to go, and I hope that they get real change in the country. I know that it's not necessarily the way things have been working out so far that's kind of pushing them to protest, but I think, their fears of what the future could be like will hopefully change things for the better in general.
Yeah, and so there's some word that in advance of the protests, when the scale of it was starting to be understood inside of India, that some sort of consolations were given in advance. But the union leaders were like, no, we're continuing with this. We're going to fight for what we think is fair. We're going to give you some of those numbers, actually. The head of one of the unions actually was quoted as saying, Prime Minister Narendra Modi said his fight is with poverty, but it seems his fight is with the poor in this country. Now, look, you can have different philosophies about how exactly you improve the condition of the working people of the poor in India or in the U.S., and that's totally fair. And obviously, there are some industries where it doesn't make sense to have government control. We don't think that the government should provide all employment. But in a country that doesn't necessarily have the history or the legislation to protect workers, where exploitation is not theoretical, where it is an everyday reality, you cannot simply give up these industries to people who are going to pay starvation wages to literally over 100 million workers. And so we can't simply look at it from our point of view and say, well, then why can't they have the same sort of balance between private and public employment as we have here? They're on a very different historical arc. And
yeah, they have different laws, and they lack the laws necessary to protect their workers. By the way, the same laws that our unions fought for here in the U.S., right? Yeah. And so I know that now I'm making this about the U.S., but I just want to get this point across. For anyone who gets angry about unions, that doesn't believe in things like collective bargaining, understand what unions have done for the American worker here in the U.S., right? It's incredibly important. And, the situation in India is different, but I could totally understand the fear of privatizing, certain job opportunities. It would be a disaster, especially when you consider what private industries are paying Indian workers right now as we speak.
Yeah, exactly. And look, regardless of a year from now, 10 years from now, what ends up happening, it's always better to have more involvement in government with regular people. That's never been a terrible thing, so long as it's peaceful, and this is. And so that's something that we should be enthusiastic about. I want to give you some of the numbers that they're considering during these protests, because it's going to really put it into a good comparison with the current situation in the U.S. The strike was called after talks with Finance Minister Arun Jaitley broke down, with union leaders rejecting his offer to raise the minimum wage for unskilled workers from the equivalent of $96 per month to $136 per month. Now, obviously, the cost of purchasing things in India is also very different, but we're talking about worlds of difference in the day-to-day experience. They're not talking for exorbitant amounts of money. Now, for overall the workers, the amount was a little bit higher, something like a little bit less than double that. But this is for unskilled workers who are making almost nothing at present. And that's not to mention all of the lacking of benefits and things like that. The union said that the government should guarantee both Social Security and health care for all, and should be hiking the minimum wage to double what it is offering in order to keep up with inflation. So they're concerned with wages. They're also concerned with everything outside of wages, which of course they're also not receiving the benefit of at this point.
Yeah, I think overall these protests are good, and I hope it leads to not just what they're asking for, which is not privatizing certain industries, but that it improves the wages of people who are working in the private sector as well. It just needs to happen, and I think again this is the natural progression of things.
Yeah. And I hope that if they're wildly successful and they get all that they're looking for, that 50 or 60 or 70 years can go by and a new generation of people can just spit at the name of unions and forget all the things that they fought for and all the things that they give us that we enjoy every single day.
Like the weekend. Well, we don't enjoy the weekend every day.
Lack of child labor,
you know what I mean.
A 40-hour work week,
right?
Insurance, all of those things. Aren't they delightful? And screw you unions for fighting for those things and being willing to have your skull cracked.
Together we can change the media, make it more representative of you and not the powerful. Come join us, make a difference. tytnetwork.com/join.